You can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. To hear the latest episode, just say, "Play the news from The Australian."
From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Tuesday, August 6th. Brittany Higgins' lawyer says Senator Linda Reynolds was trying to help Bruce Lehrmann, the man Higgins accused of rape, by sending his lawyers text messages during Lehrmann's criminal trial. Reynolds is suing Higgins and her husband David Shiraz for defamation. But Higgins' lawyer Rachel Young SC says the senator re-traumatised and harassed Brittany Higgins. Our coverage of that trial is live at theaustralian.com.au. The last standing rat of Tobruk, Tom Pritchard, has died at the age of 102. In 1941, the rats held off Axis troops for 242 days in North Africa. Pritchard lied about his age to join the army as a 19-year-old. He served as an ambulance attendant at Tobruk. Probable. That's the new terror threat level in Australia, declared by the spy agency ASIO, which is warning about the threat posed by young people, radicalised online and armed with knives or guns.
We assess there is a greater than 50% chance of an onshore attack or planning in the next 12 months.
It's all about rising tensions in the Middle East. Or is it? Today, we unpack the spy master's careful wording. In the Middle East, Israel's bombardment of Gaza is morphing into something much bigger. A regional war. Rocket sirens in Israel as civilians shelter in place. A Lebanese ambulance races through the streets of Beirut. In Iran, prayers for a Hamas leader assassinated by Israel right in the heart of Tehran. And in Australia, a chilling new mood. Here's Anthony Albanese.
ASIO has decided to return Australia's national terrorism threat level from possible to probable.
Attacks are likely to occur with little or no warning and will be difficult to detect.
That's ASIO boss Mike Burgess. On Monday, he was part of a joint press conference with Albanese and the Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus.
An escalation of the conflict in the Middle East, particularly in southern Lebanon, would inflict further strain, aggravating tensions and potentially fuelling grievances.
So, the raised terror alert is about the Israel-Gaza conflict, right? Well, it's not so clear.
Our decision is not a direct response to the tragic events in the Middle East. At this stage, we do not believe any of the terrorist plots we have investigated in the last year have been inspired by Gaza. Terrorist leaders offshore are not inspiring attacks onshore. This is why we did not raise the threat level in the immediate aftermath of the 7th of October. Indirectly, though, there have been important and relevant impacts. The conflict has fuelled grievances, promoted protest, exacerbated division, undermined social cohesion, and elevated intolerance. After the 7th of October, I warned that inflamed language could lead to inflamed community tensions. Unfortunately, this is what's playing out.
So, what's with all this opaque language?
I think Gaza is a very central aspect of what ASIO did. Mike Burgess probably being a bit softer with his language than he might otherwise have been, because he doesn't want his own comments to exacerbate and fuel the divisions and the rhetoric and the passion that we've seen in Australia ever since October 7.
That's Cameron Stewart, the chief international correspondent here at The Australian.
I guess what he's saying here, Claire, is that the Gaza conflict has shown exactly the type of intolerance, political rhetoric and hostility that we were seeing, generally speaking, in Australian society. But basically, Gaza is the best big example of it in Australia. So I think it's central to it, really, because I think what you've seen, for example, in Australia play out since October 7 fits into the categories that Mike Burgess is talking about. The whole announcement seemed to me to reek of a government and a security service very anxious not to further fan flames and passions through the actual announcement itself.
Okay, so while the politicians and Burgess are not directly saying it, this is, in large part at least, about tensions in the Middle East spilling into Australian streets.
Palestine will be free!
Incidences of anti-Semitism in Australia rose 700% after Hamas's terror attack on Israel and still remain alarmingly high.
Anthony Albanese was quick to sheet at least some of the blame home to his natural enemies in Australian politics, the Greens.
It is not normal to have people in occupations for months outside electorate offices where the work of those electorate officers is to assist people in social security and health and other areas. They're not participants in the Middle East conflict.
We've seen a huge increase in racism with the terrible rise of anti-Semitism in Australia to levels that we just haven't seen before. We've also seen, if you like, a normalisation of intolerance with the activist rump of the pro-Palestinian movement. And by that I mean not mums and dads who go out on a Sunday to vent their displeasure at what Israel's response might be. It's really the activist rump. And you've had defacing of Australian war memorials, which have absolutely nothing to do with Gaza. You've had statues toppled. You've had politicians' offices being targeted. You've had just a lot of personal abuse hurled at a whole range of people. I think that, if you like, that movement has very much crystallised exactly the sort of breakdown in civility and political discourse that Mike Burgess is talking about. And what he's saying is, look, while we've had no direct violence or plots related to this, this is a trend that could easily lead to violence down the track.
He also said, when asked about anti-Semitism, he said, yes, there's plenty of anti-Semitism, but there's plenty of Islamophobia at the same time.
It's kind of a almost equal treatment. Not quite, but almost equal treatment.
You've been covering this pretty closely, Cam, ever since October 7. Would you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that. Now, mind you, I'm not privy to the reports that Mike Burgess has seen, but certainly, Claire, as far as visibility goes in Australia, I mean, the anti-Semitism is just by far more visible than anti-Islamophobia. We're not seeing marches that are condemning Muslims. We're not seeing anything like that. We are seeing marches with Nazi sort of paraphernalia, very anti-Semitic content in signs and things like that. We're seeing quite clearly actions against Jewish businesses, against individual Jews in Australia, just because they're Jewish. Nothing more than that. And so we're just not seeing that sort of visible anti-Islamophobia. I do wonder, to be honest, whether he has said that in the same way that Penny Wong has put the two together very frequently because they don't want to be seen as particularly biased one way or the other. But certainly from my observation as a reporter covering this, it's not nearly an even problem. It's a much greater problem of anti-Semitism.
Coming up, so what will the attacks we're bracing for look like? While I've got you, The Australian subscribers are always the first to know. Join us at theaustralian.com.au. We'll be back after this break. We all have ideas about what super spies should look like. Intense jawlines, trench coats. Mike Burgess, a 60-year-old cyber warfare expert with a degree in electrical engineering, is bald with a neatly trimmed beard. He looks like he could be any senior public servant. And maybe that's the point. The best spies are supposed to blend into a crowd. What does make Burgess different is his visibility. Once or twice a year, he fronts up to the cameras to deliver a forthright, sometimes scary, speech about the big bad world out there.
I think Mike Burgess is a very good Director General compared to his predecessors. I mean, he's very outspoken, he's very direct. I think that's the way that modern chiefs of security agencies should be. You know, the old ASIO chiefs would sort of whisper and say absolutely nothing. He's a very on the front foot and saying it as it should be said, I think. You need to have an agency chief say this stuff, because if you have a politician say it, the opposition will think it's spin, it's just alarmist, etc. The whole idea here is that it does actually have an impact, and hopefully it does prevent something like this actually occurring.
Burgess said in the past 8 months there have been 8 attacks or disruptions that either involved acts of terror or were investigated as potential acts of terrorism. He didn't name the cases, but he said they had 4 things in common: lone actors,
an individual or a small group using rudimentary weapons such as knives, improvised explosives or a gun,
a fast pace of radicalisation,
violence with little or no warning and little or no planning.
They're involving kids.
In the recent cases, the oldest perpetrator was 21 and the youngest was 14.
And they are not being driven by the same thing.
Individuals are being motivated by a diversity of grievances and personal narratives. In some cases I referred to, the alleged perpetrators appear to be motivated by extreme religious beliefs. In others, nationalist and racist beliefs.
It all sounds pretty worrying, and it's ASIO wearing this. The politicians are standing back, saying they're listening to the advice from the spy masters.
The threats I'm describing are significant but not insurmountable. Probable does not mean inevitable. Australians should be aware but not afraid.
One threat that Mike Burgess almost downplayed was the sort of thing that we would have been talking about if we'd done this interview 3 or 4 years ago, Cam, which is young Muslim Australians being radicalised by ISIS or by radical preachers here in Australia. That was the big concern a few years back. He is now saying that that is not really what they're seeing now, that that's not really the big concern.
I think he's saying that that is still a concern, but we've now got other things to match that concern, and that is politically motivated rhetoric and violence, which they hadn't seen. In other words, it's not just a religiously motivated problem now. There's a whole layer of post-COVID freedom movement that hates government authority. You know, there's the rise of conspiracy theories, especially fueled by the internet. It's amazing what people are believing these days, and perhaps more unhinged people actually taking action on the basis of that. I think what he's saying is we now have a whole list of issues that are rising at the same time. And so it doesn't dilute Islamic extremism, for example, as a terror danger, because I think that's still very much a terrorist danger in Australia. I think what he's saying is we now have, unfortunately, we have other things to rival it.
If you believe a person you know is going down a dark extremist path, please talk to someone or call the National Security Hotline on 1800 123 400.
Cameron Stewart is the Australian's chief international correspondent. It's back to the office today. The New South Wales government issued a blunt order to its hundreds of thousands of employees. Working from home is over. The move is designed to improve productivity and rescue the CBD hospitality sector. That story and how it'll affect the rest of our workplaces is live now at theaustralian.com.au.